Now, the important part of the housekeeping, we have an incredible panel with us that are going to share their insight. We will have a Q&A session at the end, but you don't have to wait to that session, the last of the webinar, to pose your questions. We want to encourage you to use the chat feature. We'll watch the chat, we'll keep the questions coming, and we'll definitely have our panel weave in answers that time. So keep in mind that we will watch that, utilize it. Let's go ahead and get started with the practice question. Get everyone into that moment here of practicing. Put your answer in. What is the greatest challenge growers face today? I know it's a little bit broad, but that's purposeful. So let's go ahead and see some of your thoughts and the answers. I'm going to first explain Clink Different, then I'm going to introduce our brilliant panel. And Clink Different is funding from the EU and purposely bringing together the country of Germany and the region of Bordeaux. Neither really compete with the styles of wine that they produce, and it's so important to get the message out in terms of unique wines that many of us as buyers, consumers, etc., don't realize exist for these locations. For instance, we want to draw attention to all the amazing white wine, rosé, sparkling wine, dessert wine, in addition to the reds of Bordeaux. And with Germany, those incredible varietals we don't always consider. We know Riesling, we love it, but there's great Pinot Blanc, Pinot Gris, Pinot Noir, Limburger, Sylvaner, you name it. Rosé, sparkling, all of that. Okay, so we won't dwell any further. Let's get our panel introduced here. I'm Laura Williamson. I'm going to guide you through this. I'm really just the facilitator of the brilliant panel that's with me today. So I'm going to let them introduce yourself. Kai, I'm going to tip it off to you. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, and thank you to organize this amazing talk today. My name is Kai Schätzl. I'm the owner and winemaker of a 15-hectare winery in Germany. We are located in Nierstein. That's a small village in the region of Rhine-Hessen, and to make it easy to understand where we are, some of you perhaps know Frankfurt, and if you're standing in Frankfurt in Germany and you look to Paris, you look over the Rhine River and then you find Nierstein with this deep red slatey-like vineyards directly on the Rhine River. We are a biodynamic and organic producer, and we have a history of more than 600 years here in our winery, but we still feel like a small startup, and more startup every day since the climate change did affect our farming strategy. And so I'm thrilled to talk with you about what we felt within the last years and what we adapted and what we can discuss with this amazing board of people tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Kai. Great to have you with us. And Basile, I'll turn it over to you next. Welcome.
Hello, thank you, Laura. My name is Basile Tesseron. I'm a wine producer in Bordeaux, in Saint-Estèphe to be precise, up north Bordeaux, 1 hour and a half away from the city center. It's 40 hectares vineyard called Château Lafont-Rocher. Everything is, all the vines are surrounding the house. We've been there since 1960, and we are right now we've begun our conversion organic in August 2020, and the estate is now run with a agroecological view. So basically, not only growing are we growing now vines, but we are also growing trees there, about with 40 to 50 different species, varieties. Voila.
Fascinating. Thank you so much. Great to have you with us as well. And then Francois, let's have you introduce yourself.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Hello, Laura. I am François Despagne. I am the owner and the winemaker in Saint-Emilion, the right bank from Bordeaux. My vineyard, it's a very old vineyard because my family is a whole family in Saint-Emilion since the 13th century, and we are the owner of this chateau. Grand Corman is on the north of Saint-Emilion, bordering Pomerol, and Espagne is my name. It is the reason why the chateau is Grand Corman Espagne. And today I represent the 7th generation of the same family in Saint-Emilion. And so I am first, I am an enologist too, and I do research in molecular biology on the yeast. And I come back in the vineyard in 25 years ago. And so I am now, after the passion for the yeast, now it is the passion for the vines. And so my vineyard is 28 hectares. I am inorganic and biodynamic. And it is a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Francois. We appreciate you being here. So last but not least, Dr. Uli Fischer, who I've read much of his research for over 10 years now, and am so honored to have you with us to round out this amazing panel of growers. Uli, introduce yourself. Uh-oh, you're on mute. We want to hear you. Uli, you've got to unmute yourself and start
Now
over.
everything is fixed. Hi, I'm Uli. I grew up at the Mosel in Bernkastel-Kues. I did an apprenticeship as a winemaker and viticulturist, studied in Germany, and graduated from UC Davis, where I was initiated by Anne Noble to sensory science and many others. And I'm working currently in the Institute for Viticulture and Enology in the Pfalz region in Neustadt. And our research is focusing how we adapt to climate change in viticulture, how to adapt in enology to the challenges, new varieties. We are working on more resistant varieties, but we worked also quite a bit on the terroir of Riesling, how the soil, how the local climate is shaping the different styles of Rieslings. And we're teaching a lot, including an English MBA for wine, sustainable and sales, which is offered. And we have quite a few American students every year there. And I'm looking forward for our discussion. Thank you.
Wonderful. So I promised you an incredible panel of experts, and that's what we do have. So thank you all. Now we'll move forward here. We'll just give you a backdrop of our agenda. And so Alexa will have you move the slide forward. Thank you. Now we are going to first just kind of give us a definition of drought, then talk about the soils and water management. And we might weave in more than just the soils, but the soil is our key focus. Then we'll have the producers discuss the tools that they're using to combat this craziness. And then, of course, wine styles. What are we in for in terms of flavor profile? What shifts might we expect? Then our Q&A will follow. So let's get with it here, the definition of drought. We tried to break this down into 2 simple key steps. So basically, a lack of water available to vines seems pretty straightforward. Now, this is involving the organic matter that's there, the ability for that organic matter in the soil to actually hold the water. This is the contents of what we're looking at, as well as the lack of water holding capacity in the soil itself. So evaporation, temperature, wind, the intense degree of the soil, all of this contributes to that loss of moisture retention. So this is really critical. We will also kind of weave in the timing. You know, timing for that water is impactful in its own right. Water at the wrong time is not helpful. Water at the right time is crucial. So as we move forward here, our next slide, Uli, we're going to have you discuss this bit of detail. There may be one more picture there. Alexa, great. Thank you, Uli.
Yeah, Laura explained you what drought is, but now you see the consequences in the vineyards. And if you believe it or not, these are vineyards from Germany from the year 2000 18 from Franconia. And you see that the drought is so severe that the basal leaves are dying. And for that reason, we lose our photosynthesis. We have less sugar, less color, less acidity, less flavor aroma compounds. And this is quite of a challenge. And one big problem is that we also encounter what we call sunburn. And this is a picture you see below the vineyard. And you see if we have defoliated, if we have removed too much of the leaves, and then the temperature rises up to 35 to 38 degrees Celsius, that's above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, then we get this sunburn as you get it on your skin. And we not only lose quite a bit of crop, but we also lose quality by that. So we really try to cope with this drought, and there are many ways to do that. And just to see on the left side, this is done with a moderate irrigation. And on the right side, you see the same vineyard, the same grape without irrigation. First of all, you see the difference in the yield. But secondly, if you see the very loose cluster on the right side, you see that there's more sun coming into the cluster, into the berries. This has some positive connotations like more flavor compounds, but it also means, at least for Riesling, that we increase the potential for the petrol of flavor, which is nice if it's at a small rate, but if it's getting too intense, then people turn away. Now you ask yourself, what can we do? Irrigation is not available at all places, especially at the steep slopes. And that's where the wine growers come in. They increase the organic matter to hold more water. But they also do something pretty intelligent. They shift from one rootstock to the other. There are rootstocks out there which go deeper into the soils, so they can go on more on deeper reservoirs of water. But this has also an impact on how the grapes are looking like. Another thing is also that we can change the Riesling clones, for example. There are more compact clones and there are more looser clones. So also here we can react. For example, if I'm in a steep slope, I would make more of a compact clone because there we have just more sunshine. It's very steep. The sun is coming very good to the grapes, and in a more flat soil with more water availability, I can plant more of a loose cluster where I'm also more concerned to have no botrytis. Finishing up, the biggest challenge for us, especially in the Riesling vineyards, is the steep slopes, because in steep slopes we have very often more shallow soils. We have more stony soils. Think about slate, think about quartzit in the Rheingau, think about the reddish slate in the Roter Hang of Kai Schätzel or granite soils. And here we have more evaporation because it's hotter in the steep slopes, and it's also more able to protect the vines with covers. So it is quite a bit of a problem, and I'm very curious about what the people from Bordeaux, the growers like Kai and others, are telling us, how they manage that problem in their own vineyards.
Thank you, Uli. That was a perfect setup. And so we are going to dive into the soils next. So we are going to first talk on the gravelly soils here. We've got all three types in Bordeaux. We'll focus on that for a moment, and then we're going to wrap it up with the soils in Germany, which it's a little hard to encapsulate all the soils in Germany. There's, Uli tells me easily over 15, which I guessed 14, but he says there's more. So we're going to start first on our quest with Bordeaux. And Basile, you're going to take us through the sandy gravel. We know you've got some clay too. So I'm going to turn it over to you and let you tell us a little bit about this. And then Francois will have you kind of come into play with the right bank and the clay and the limestone. So let's have Alexa advance the next slide here. And Basile, I'll turn it to you to tell us what you're doing.
Thank you, Laura. But on gravelly soil, lately we've had some issues, whereas many of you encountered, of course, as wine growers throughout the world. But really, in gravelly soil in Bordeaux has been tough. All of the gravelly soils in La Rochère surrounding the house, really, they are there. And to give you an example of what has happened lately, we planted plots of Cabernet Sauvignon in 2015. Usually, in the first years after plantation, you need to have at least 3 years before getting the first grapes. Well, we waited almost 6 years to have a normal crop for those. The 2021 is actually the first year where this plot of 1.5 hectare has been producing normal yields. That was absolutely a nightmare. And we couldn't find a way to keep some water in the soil. Basically, with gravelly soil, as we are working the soils, we tended to do that for the past 20 years. So after stopping using herbicides, by doing so, the water was evaporating very fast. So there was no humidity in the first layer of soil, and so the vines were suffering from that. So for the past 5 years, those plots have been these plots have been suffering from a lack of water, and the roots couldn't go deeper into the soil. So basically, this plot of Cabernet Sauvignon hasn't been able to find some water, and that was just impossible for it to grow. By looking at that was happening, we thought to ourselves that there was something to be done. So we began to replant herbs and to have a canopy in between the rows. And now 90% of the estate is basically with herbs in between the rows. Our trouble was that we have the high density. So it's basically there is only 1 meter in between one vine tree and the other. So and there are no tools to work this way in our area. So we have to build them on our own. So the idea there on this particular plot and on those plots with gravelly soil was to have a canopy of herbs that was with enough density before the summer, and that we could bend in order for the water to have the water restrained inside the soils, as it is with gravel, pebbles, and gravels and sand. You could imagine how fast the water is going down. Basically, with Francois is having limestone that should be roughly about 1 meter to in between 40 to 2 meters deep. Below us, the limestone is basically 15 meters deeper. So with the young vine, they really need to push themselves in order to find the water.
Thank
So
you.
this was really the idea.
Very fascinating and amazing to hear the trouble. It puts it into perspective for us. Really fascinating. Francois, we'll have the slide move forward, and we've got your soils here, the plateau with clay and limestone, and then we're going to go into the slopes as well. So we'll just have you touch on that, Francois, if you don't mind.
You know, the word very important for us is clay. And you know, on the right bank, we have a lot of merlot. It is not we have a lot of merlot. It is because we have clay, it is possible to put merlot. Because the clay, for us, it is a reserve of water. You know, if you analyze the last decades, we have the change. It is we have a lot of rain in winter with temperate climate, with a lot of water in spring, and so we have the same level of water. You know, 800 millimeters of water each year if you do an average. And so all this rain in spring go on the clay, and it is like a sponge. And so it is a reserve. It is a reserve for the Merlot. It is a reserve for the roots. And so it is very important for us to have this clay, because by capillarity, the Merlot are going to take the water which is necessary for his behavior, for his development, for his growing. So for us, the clay, it depends, it is limestone, it is blue clay. You know, I am one vineyard in Castillon with clay limestone slope soil. I have another in Pomerol. I have here in Saint-Emilion, it is more blue clay, you say, but it's clay. Blue clay, it is iron deposits. It is the same behavior. It is to have this clay for the Merlot, to have this reserve of water. And the rain is still present in our vineyard. It is very difficult after. The drought arrive more in July and August. And so for us, our job, it is to try to put the roots in this clay to have this reserve of water and to avoid to have drought. You know, it is the keys. It is the keys. So for the soil, the clay, very important for us. And for the Cabernet Franc too, because, you know, it is a blend between the Merlot and the Cabernet Franc, but we are going to speak about the blend and the change of the blend perhaps in the future.
Great. Maybe we'll touch on that with the wine styles. And
Yes.
so thank you. Kai, we'll have you tell us a little bit about the Germany side where you are, Rheinhessen, and what you're combating.
Yeah, so I told you already that we are located in Rheinhessen in quite of steep vineyards that are facing down to the Rhine River. And the terroir is a slaty red, very stony terroir. And there we have a lot of challenges because it's steep and it's rocky and not very easy to store water in this terroir. But before I go into the details, I want to give you a short historical idea why we are planting wine there. Because the challenge 100 years ago was the opposite of what we are talking about at the moment. It was too cold in our region. We are named the cool climate region of wine. And in the old days, and these old days are not too long ago, so we are sure that this thing happened 100 years ago and even longer. But when I was a kid, we were harvesting more than 1 month later than in a normal year like today. So it was really cool, and it was not normal that we had ripe grapes in a normal vintage in our region and in Germany in especially. So the old people were smart and they moved to the hottest parts of the region. They went where the snow was melting first, and so they figured out that it was happening in the super steep vineyard, southeast facing, and they used this kind of microclimates close to the rivers where they had direct sunlight, and they had the indirect reflections coming from the river going back to the steep hills as well. So this was super nice in cool climates, and they invented a lot of more tools to prevent grapes from moldiness and all these challenges. But with the climate change, at the beginning, everybody was super happy, honestly, especially in our regions. We received higher sugar levels, higher alcohols, wines were not as sour as before. And even this botrytis challenge was not the challenge like it was in the old days. So at the beginning, everybody was happy. And then we received ripe grapes and riper grapes. And today we are in a time when we sometimes receive overripe grapes. And the challenges, what Uli already pointed out, grapes that are under a stress of a leak or a lack of water. And so the wine style is not only going to a more drinkable, more heavy wine style, it's also going to a wine style that is sometimes not able to age like it was in the past, and so on. The challenge is extremely intense in the steep vineyards because the water, if it comes down nowadays, comes down quite fast. So a lot of rain is not coming over a very light summer rain. It comes in minutes, and it's a load of water. And this load of water in the steep vineyards cannot stay or go into the ground. It's just going down, and it's going to the Rhine River. So we get some water, but it's not staying in the vineyards, and at the same time we have the heat of the next day, and so the vines are really stressed. And what we can do, we will talk with the next chapter, because there are strategies, but it's a challenge. So it's not easy, but it's a lot of fun, and I think that's our biggest responsibility, to stay in a dry farming, or mostly dry farming production for the future. And I think it's possible.
Thank you, Kai. Thank you. And maybe Uli, I know Kai was coming from the Nierstein and Rheinhessen point of view, but you've done so much research through all of Germany. Maybe give us another view, for instance, Mosel, the Slate, some of these other areas we're familiar with, of what's going on right now with the soils, what they're doing too. Uh-oh, you're on mute.
I
There
will
we go.
learn that to unmute you. Sorry. So you have to keep in mind, if we have a steeper slope, we have even also warmer soils, and warmer soils mean that all the organic matter is decomposed even faster. So from that point of view, it is even more important for the steep slope that we bring in organic matter. For example, they bring in straw, they bring in other organic material, maybe from the forest and other places, to replenish this fast degradation of the organic matter, which is extremely important. And it is something that we vary in Germany, not only by the different soils, but also by the different water precipitation. We have areas which differ by a factor by 3, and you always have to keep in mind, it's a little bit different to California or to warmer areas where we have always the drought problems. In Germany, we have the droughts maybe in 2 years. Then we have 2 normal years, and then we have a very wet year. And from this regard, we have to react very fast and in every year in a little bit different ways. So that's quite a challenge. Like this year, we had more water than it was needed. So we had to make sure that there was enough cover crops to grow on that water and to allow the water to infiltrate into the soils. And in another year, we have to mow this cover crops, keep it very low, so that we have just the opposite, that we can protect against too much water loss. So that's quite a bit of a challenge in a northern area of the world, like in Germany, where the weather patterns are changing from year to year more than it is the case in the south.
Thank you, Uli. And that kind of sets us up for the next topic as we move forward with our next slide here. Some of these tools that were mentioned, just as Uli started to touch on that, in our next slide, we've got some of these that are listed here. And we just broke this down into 2 slides. And as Uli mentioned, bringing the straw, the compost, grape pumice, all of that, the repurposed bark, what they can bring from the forest to the vineyards to help create the cover that they need to utilize and encapsulate moisture. This is the water capacity boost that we need. And just as Uli mentioned, the cover crops, that organic matter, trying to decrease erosion too, not only on the slopes, but definitely on the flatter soils as well. But, also, I think another part that is kind of discussed often, and we'll hear someone speak to it, I have a feeling, encouraging that shadow. So higher canopies, a little bit more leaf, de-leafing less. Any of that shadow, that cover crop that is creating the shadow, that does go dormant in the drought. So that is the benefit too of that cover crop, as it does tend to shut down like the vine does, and it doesn't use the water when there is intense drought. But again, we touched on rootstocks. There was a question that popped up, not in the chat. I saw it in the Q&A. Definitely keep your questions in the chat. The growers will help us. But maybe someone could touch on rootstocks of what they're using now to help with later ripening grapes and rootstocks needing less water. Now let's go to our next slide with a second batch of the tools here. We know for sure earlier harvesting, definitely in the warm zones. We talked about that leaf and trying to keep leaves to help protect from the sunburn. Moving to the trellis system instead of the single pole, just to get some of that shadow. We might have anyone that's applicable to, especially in Germany, some of those steep slopes that are single pole. Be curious to hear about the trellis shift. And then the vine row orientation, where we've always thought that, you know, the southern exposure, southwest was the best, maybe now shifting that orientation a little bit more northerly to try to minimize the intensity of the sun and the duration of that sun's rays. So I think just that sums it up. I'm going to start to turn it over here. Why don't we go to Francois to start us off here, and then we'll switch and I'll pop you all in for your comments.
In the vineyard, we do a lot of research for the rootstock to change rootstock and to change a little, because our blend, you know, it is more Merlot and with some Cabernet Franc and not a lot Cabernet Sauvignon, depends on the soil. But for us on the right bank, we increase the proportion of the Cabernet Franc because it is a later ripening grapes. So it's very interesting. And other things, it is for these grapes, these varietals decrease the pH. And so you have more acidity in the wine to balance the Merlot. So other things very important in the vineyard, it is to decrease the height of the canopy of the leaves. Because I know 20 years ago, a lot of all the vineyards in the right bank on Bordeaux increased the height of the leaves, the canopy, to try to have more evapotranspiration, so to have more concentration in the grapes. And now so we are going to change, not to increase, but to decrease, to try to have less evapotranspiration. And so you are more, to have not too sugar in the wine, because today our production in Merlot, it is possible to have 14 or 15 in alcohol. So we change. These things are the best things. And so a lot of people stop to deleafing. In the past, I remember 20 years ago, some vineyards do a double deleafing on one side and at the other side after. And now we stop, everybody stop two sides, and some do one side, and a lot of, it depends on the year. You know, for example, 18, 19, and 20 are very dropped weather. So it's to stop deleafing. But other vintage, this one, 21, we have sometimes in some plots, it was interesting to do a one-side deleafing. So for me, we adapt, each vintage is different. And so, but deleafing, the eighth of the grape, the eighth of the canopy, and to have grapes later and rootstock, it's a good way to maintain the specificity of Bordeaux wines without change all, because we do experiment with other grapes, you know, with not Bordeaux grapes, like a Touriga National or like this one, but the style of Bordeaux change. So I prefer to adapt to my vineyard first to maintain the balance in the Bordeaux wine in the blend with our grapes.
Thank you, Francois. Thank you for detailing that. I would love to hear from Kai next. Kai, do you mind to tell us your thoughts?
Yeah, so it's more and more getting a picture, especially if you talk to different regions and listen to different strategies that finally more or less come close together in the idea of saving water and making the wines less thirsty. And the special challenge, like Uli was already pointing out, here is in the northern parts of Germany or in Europe, that we still have flexible weather situations. So we need a flexible system to interact with sun and rain. And so we are still in a learning decade, but what I can tell you is that nature is the best and most flexible system if you listen to nature. So as more as you are starting to grow a kind of wildness, as more you have several components coming together, playing together, balancing out each other, and only interact if really necessary. And so the biggest interaction, of course, are that we only cut the wines if we get to wetter situations. If it's super hot, like we had in most of the last years, we try to minimize any cuttings, and we do no leaf pluggings anymore, for example, and no green harvestings. We try to find, or we try to animate the vines to protect themselves, because a wine by nature is protecting its fruit from sunlight, and it's protecting the ground to dry out by covering everything. And if you let a wine grow, it will, by nature, if you look to bush wines and so on, it will cover even the terrain. It will cover the whole system to save water, and that's what we try to use if we have the chance. So if it's hot and dry, we have kind of pergola systems that grow over the vines, and if it's wetter like this here, we need to cut the vines and let some air and some light go into the grapes. But the system is not over, and I'm pretty much sure that we will learn a lot within the next years to be smarter and even faster in these adaptations, to
Yes.
find a good system that is interacting with weather and interacting with the cover crop, the herbs, the flowers, the strawberries, and trees that
Sure.
are combined in this kind of complex system.
Great way to point that out. Thank you. Now, Basile, anything you'd like to add to this? I know you do a lot of work with, the reforestry, planting trees.
Yes, well, we're just at the beginning of this story for the moment. We as Kai was saying, it's just we are still looking forward for a solution. There are no magical solution at the moment that can do like that, and it will take time anyway. Changing root stocks will take time because obviously we know that it's going to take at least 5 years in order to get the first grapes. So then changing, as François was saying, that was funny because when I arrived 20 years from in Bordeaux back to work with my family, we had to get the higher high the leaves were the surface of leaves had to be as high as possible in order to get most concentration. Now we're trying to get less, and in order to have less alcohol. So basically, but the thing is, it's only very recently that we found out that the global warming and the accidents and weather accident that we were having were somehow going to be happening on regular basis. We just thought that it was random, and it's not. So yes, the deleafing and the way of deleafing is something, keeping some herbs, planting some trees. Everything is important, but we are just at the beginning of the story, and especially in Northern Europe. So I think I do believe that planting trees is important for a few things. Obviously, the symbiosis in between the vines and the trees themselves, and also the fact that we'll be cutting the branches from the trees and reusing them as compost inside in between the rows. So this degradation will help in order to have high concentration of natural and fungus in the above soils, because due to the molding, due to the working, due to the fact that we are working the soil, we had less and less fungus into the soil, and those fungus such as mycorrhizae are really helpful because they are keeping the moisture also. And so it's plenty of things all put together, and that's the fact that we are now talking to each other worldwide about what's happening and how we can manage differently, that it's going to lead us to a global to solutions that are local and could be global.
Thank you. And I think it is fascinating, just as you touched on, that we now know that this is kind of the new permanent status, this juxtaposition of the extreme hot and wet. It was seen as maybe just an instance that we had to deal with, but now we know that we have to adapt, definitely. So interesting too to hear that you say many growers around the world are discussing this. That's how we move forward faster. All right, so now we're going to touch on the styles, and I'd love to have Uli kind of come in first and talk about this. And I do realize that this is subjective. Does this drought, this heat, this battle that we're dealing with, and lack of water and moisture, does this affect the wine styles? If so, how does it affect it? And Uli's done some incredible research on it. So Uli, we're going to let you take it over and explain some of this, and then we'll open it up to the rest.
Well, first I would like to make two comments which are important for the trade in the US. A few of the growers said in the last decade we were fighting to get really ripe grapes. Now we get the ripe grapes for granted, and that means we have riper grapes in Germany. That means we do not need residual sugar as much anymore to balance an unripe acidity. So Germany improved over the last 20 years tremendously in making very good dry Rieslings. But as you know, Riesling can be balanced with sugar. But we opened also our portfolio to dry Pinot Noirs, to dry Pinot Blancs, Silvaner, and those. So that's also an impact of the climate change and of warmer and drier weather. But now coming to this picture here, it's based on 5 vintages, and we looked into 24 different sites in Rheinland-Pfalz, Mosel, Nahe, Pfalz, and Rheinhessen, and we wanted to see how the aroma is changing. And it was a common perception that it's the red wines which are really supported by a mild water stress, but not the white wines. And when we looked at our data, we can see if we have no water stress, which is on the bottom on the right side, we have a stronger acidity. But when we move into the moderate water stress, the wines are getting more colorful. We have more honey, we have more floral, more exotic fruit like mango, passion fruit, and the important peach attribute of Riesling. And so we could really show that a mild water stress for a Riesling is not negative. Actually, it makes the wine maybe even more diverse, more interesting. And Alexa, if you could go further, we link that now to the pH of the soil, to the clay content, to the carbonate content, and so on. And we looked, each point on the left side is one vineyard and one wine coming from this vineyard. And if you click further, you can see the wines with a little bit more water stress, but more of this exotic flavor. These are the wines coming from limestone soils, from Rheinhessen, from Franconia, from areas in the Pfalz. If you click further, also the slate was in our study here. We had less water stress. That was the 2 vineyards, but it was a little bit more acidic, which also makes sense, a little bit more acid. And if you click further, you can see the Rotliegende, the red slate, like it is the case in the Niersteiner vineyards of Kai. But we also see here the basalt from the famous vineyard in Forst in the Pfalz and other soils. So the take-home message is it does not get too hot and too dry for Riesling. We just have to adapt our way we work in the vineyard. We also work in the cellar, and then we can still have this fascinating variety of Rieslings, and some water stress is actually quite positive and makes the wine even more expressive regarding the flavors.
Thank you. Really interesting studies here. Now, I know that Basile had to leave. He did have a prior engagement that was kind of abutting our webinar. So we'll turn now to Francois and we're not yet on key takeaways. I know Alexa moved us forward. We can stay on this slide though, that's fine. But Francois, tell us how you feel this challenge with drought, with water stress, might be shifting your styles.
I can say today it is positive because we have more color in the wine, you have more mature tannins, and you have a low acidity. It is more little new world style wine, and so probably we have produced, if you analyze the last decades, you have 9, 10, 11, 15, 16, 18, 19, 20 are very, very beautiful wine, very full wine. The other are more classical Bordeaux. And so the style of Bordeaux changed a little. And our work today, it is to avoid to change. So it is the reason why I have explained what is it interesting to have the Cabernet Franc, to maintain the acidity, to balance the alcohol, because the alcohol increase in our wines, because the Merlot, we have a lot of wine with 14, 15 degrees in alcohol. So if you don't have the good pH to maintain the acidity, to maintain the freshness, you don't produce Bordeaux wines. So it is the reason why it is interesting for me to go to the Cabernet Franc, to have a good acidity in the wines, and so to increase in the blend the part of Cabernet Franc. And so I think it is important for us to try to be inorganic. Inorganic, I am a scientist, but it is interesting to perhaps to work more on this way. But I analyze in my vineyard, in my grapes, in my wine, the pH decrease. 0.1, 0.2, and so you have decrease, and so you have this freshness when you are inorganic, when you don't use chemical products. So it is the reason why in this type of vintage, it is a full vintage, it is we say sunny vintage, to be inorganic. For the soil, sure. For the behavior of the workers of mine, because I live here, but for the wine too, to be inorganic. So today it is positive for the wine, but with more degrees Celsius, 1 degree or 2 degrees, probably change too. So we must adapt and to try to avoid to go in this direction, to maintain the Bordeaux style. I don't know, we are the best in the world. I say the Bordeaux style.
Thank you, I love it. Now, Kai, let's bring you into this discussion and just see what you're noticing with yours. And, you did share with me earlier that you produce even some natural wines, unsulfured wine. I'm curious to hear.
Thanks, and I'm very happy now to come out with some very interesting information. It was really not easy to focus during the last challenging topics we have been talking, because we are super happy, and honestly, I'm very proud to be a farmer in a time like this, because it's a very nice core idea of being a farmer, to adapt as good as possible, and that's a lot of fun at the same time, even though it's a challenge. So for us, I can tell you, even though we have been talking about a lot of climate change situations, I just pointed out some numbers from our last 10 vintages, and what we figured out is that during everything went warmer around us, our adaptations and our learnings were even faster, and the wines did learn perhaps faster than some of our lessons can be hold. So our alcohol in our wines went down by 1.5 volumes in the average, and the pH levels went down at the same time. And that's not just a coincidence. So that's a result of days like today, when we point at the topics and we realize that we cannot keep everything like it was. And of course, we did some mistakes, and perhaps we did a lot of mistakes, but finally, we are on a good way. And we are learning that alcohol is not the only solution to wine drinking pleasure. We learn that some acidity can be very helpful, and we learn that we can stay with Riesling in our region for perhaps another 100 years or so. So even though some say with the climate change, we moved more or less 400 kilometers more south, if you point the climate belt on the globe. At the same time, we learn to adapt. And yes, it will stay a challenge to have an eye on the water household and to stay with dry farming ideas, but I think it's a very important goal in the near future. I don't think that it's necessary to use drinking water to produce alcohol, but I know that we still need to do research, and we need to talk, and we need to stay honest. And one honest thing at the same time is that our yields went down dramatically during this change. Our work went up dramatically to interact with nature. If it's now biodynamic and organic, or a smart water strategy we are using, strategy means time, and time is money in a way. So we know that it's possible, and we still believe. And we are thankful if people like Uli help us to continue this innovation program. But so far, I can tell you, I think it's possible, even though nature is doing its game, wilderness is healing a lot. So, yeah.
So it's really interesting to hear so far. It's been positive from you. And I just think it's something that we don't normally focus on in terms of this shift. We think that the consequences are all negative, and we know that this could shift quickly, just even with another degree of rise in temperature. So we have to keep on that and watch it. Now, as we move forward here, we've just summarized a few key takeaways, and I think that there's some interesting points to be noticed. Basically, we've got, coming back to that discussion that both Francois and Kai and of course Uli have mentioned, biodiversity, but organic and biodynamic farming, all of this intertwined really is our defense against nature, or sorry, with nature, not being against nature, working with it to help boost our defenses. So very important to keep that in mind. And of course, those vineyards that have had a little bit more time from that transition to get established, what's fascinating is on that second bullet point, this point of yields do not decrease during drought. That's coming from a single plot. It's in Geisenheim, but it is some research they followed for over 15 years with sustainable farming, biodynamic and organic. And what they're really attributing this to is that with that vineyard style of farming, if there is at least history to it, the vines are more resilient. The yields are not dropping drastically with drought. Now they do drop when you've got too much water, and like for instance, what we dealt with in 2021, but they were fascinated to see that even in those hotter vintages, what we thought was happening, the yields decreasing, that's not always the case. So it kind of points to the vine being in its own balance based on that farming. I thought that was really interesting. And then of course, we're just all coming back to, as Kai put it, trying to make the vines less thirsty. That's our quest here. Sometimes that might need irrigation right at the right time, the most crucial, as we saw with Uli mentioning in the beginning, how that can impact the flavor. And we don't want to lose sight of our next generation, how they're moving us forward, because their ability to harness this unique farming with organic biodynamics, they are teaching many of those that are involved in sustainability, and it's few baby steps equal huge progress. So they are leading the way, they're creating that symbol and that guide that we need to advance us as fast as possible to handle the undulations in the vintages. So I think we're really kind of towards the end here of our seminar. I think let's just move forward, Alexa, on the letting everyone know we're going to enter into Q&A. We're going to bring our growers in and let them kind of open up with questions. So I'm hoping, I haven't opened the chat yet to see, but I just, before we get to that point, want to ask again everyone to fill out your survey. Let's move forward to the next slide. And remember, the reason that the survey is there, it's not only to guide us in terms of improving the next sessions, but it's also to give you a chance to win a seat at the VIP tasting. So that is going to be a tasting that you'll receive wines for, and there's a drawing for those. You have to be with that survey filled out to be entered into the drawing, but there will be a small amount, an intimate group drawn at random for that VIP event. So with that, I've done all the housekeeping. I do see a question here. It says here, Uli's answering it. Great. Uli answered about the rootstocks. Awesome. Wonderful. So I think that unless I've missed a question, if anyone saw a question that was missed, let's just...
Laura, may I make one comment to the trade people?
Great.
All the people said you have to think in a complex way, and that involves you as well. If we have drier vintages, if we have more sunshine, we have more production of petrol flavor, at least the potential of the petrol. And now you are coming in. We have made studies about the temperature when we store the wine, when we transport the wine, and how much of the petrol flavor is being evolved on the bottle. And there are huge differences between 7 degrees, 15 and 25 degrees. So if you get a wine from a steep slope or from a warmer area or from a warm year, you have to keep in mind that you need to be refrigerated containers, and also check the way from the port to your place when you're in Florida, when you're somewhere in Kansas City, so that this is still quite good cooled, because the temperature is the main factor after bottling the wine, which produces more, a lower level of the petrol flavor. And that's something which is in your responsibilities. And I wanted to get this across to you from our research. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope everyone understood that really that level of TDN or petrol that we're experiencing is implicated, enhanced, boosted with warmer temperatures through transit. And that is something that Uli has done research on, and I think it is a fascinating bit of information that I wasn't aware of until you brought that up.
We have a new question in the chat, Laura. I'm sure you can see it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So those in Bordeaux, would you ever consider applying to INAC for allowance of irrigation, or is that strictly necessary in terms of what you're looking at with water? Francois, would you?
Yes. In Bordeaux today, it is forbidden to do irrigation, to put water in the vineyards until 3-year-old vines. But probably the rules are going to change, and in some year it will be possible, with very strict consideration, to irrigate young vines, to be controlled by the ENAO. ENAO, it is the public control of the Minister of Agriculture. And so Now the doors are a little open, because until today it was forbidden to use water in the vineyard when the plantation, when the vines can produce grapes. Yeah, after 2-3 years old, it was forbidden. But
and so, Francois, what you're saying is now the INAO is actively putting that discussion on the table and working toward making some shifts in the law, right? To protect growers, protect vines, ensure that there's not too much loss, because we know that if vines don't have even enough water at the right moment, the vines will die eventually from that lack of water. So
Absolutely.
Right now, what you're saying is that there is discussion with INAO
absolutely,
on this.
you have discussion, but it is possible in the rules now. But it is very French. You are very strict. You have control and like this. But the doors are open on the rules of each appellation. It is possible to irrigate, but the producer decide not to irrigate. But in some years, for example, 2 years ago in 2020, some appellation was it was possible for them to irrigate some plots of young vines. Okay, but it is not Bordeaux. Bordeaux, it is irrigation, and so with the problem with the water for the future, it is one of the problem for me and for the vineyard in the world. So to try to begin to irrigate, it is a big discussion in Bordeaux.
Thank you. And I do know that even in the Mosel, I've spoken with some growers, they're adding irrigation too. And they're anticipating that the laws are going to shift here. And it's not about wanting to use irrigation every year. It's having it ready, available for that moment when they need it to save the vineyard or the year's crop for that matter. So it is fascinating to hear that we're seeing the laws shift. There has to be some change on that. We know it's necessary. I think there's another great question here too, and I might open that up to Kai, since you're actively working with biodynamic. Let's see here, or maybe, let's see, did I miss the chat? Let me go back, I just saw it. With respect to biodynamics, has there been research on the impact of the mycorrhiza on wine health and quality? I don't know if you see that question in the chat, Kai.
Yeah, perhaps coming back to this question on biodynamics and the surrounding effects and quality. First, we need to discuss what is quality. So what I can say and what I can underline is that most of the wines I love to drink are made in the more or less organic or biodynamic way. Most of the iconic farmers are working with a big respect to nature, and most of them are in a big adaptation process. And that is more or less, name it biodynamics or not. It's the idea of listening to nature. It's the idea of having respect and looking to the details, not only to the books. Books are history. What we do out there is the future. And so for a lot of things, we are getting a feeling at the moment. We don't have final results, but we get a feeling what the wines like and what they might react like. And I think this experience is best to indicate by you as consumers, saying which wines you like. And if we look to the most expensive or the most dramatically cool ideas and changes in the wine world, most of them are doing it. I know that I did not answer this question with a research study. Perhaps for this point, Uli is again back on board, on track. But I know, and I can, with a 99% feeling, I can underline that if you treat nature with respect and look to the details, the result will be what we call quality. And the quality of the future we are talking about is content as well, content of knowledge, and a kind of idea we can talk and bring to people, that wine is only one agricultural product, but a product that is bringing the idea of the farmer to the table. Perhaps better than a lot of other organic products. Wine is in the middle of the discussions of tables and good nights and dinners and good moments. So it makes people to think and rethink about what we are really doing. And so we have a big responsibility to bring this to the people and make it tasty at the same time.
Thank you, Kai. And I did see that question about the newly approved grapes, and just want to point out that's the newly approved grapes in Bordeaux, but from the growers, just like Francois mentioned, he wants to keep his Merlot, and other growers that really want to anchor those grapes that they historically have been known for and want to preserve. That's their mission, is to find routes to protect what they have, not necessarily replant with newly approved grapes, because it does change that style. Even slightly, it does have an impact on the flavor and the shift. That was just a point that I will make from speaking with other growers and hearing their view on that, expressed by their personal opinion. So let's see here. I'm looking at this long question. Let's see, Alexa, can you read that for me? Or Shelley, is that your question, Shelley, to the others? Do you
No,
wanna
I was
read-
just answering. I was just answering
Great.
Arnold's question.
Wonderful. I've got it minimized so it's a little harder to see. Perfect. Now, I think before we let everyone go, I just want to thank the panel again for all their time. They've been generous with their time, their research, their experience, information firsthand. Fascinating. We know we are up for challenges, this whole vacillation, year to year vintage craziness. I won't call it variation, I'll call it pure craziness. So we are going to stay tuned, of course. And I don't know if I've missed any questions.
Laura, yes, I thought, sorry, I wanted to, I have a question here that I thought was interesting.
Thank you.
With respect to biodynamics, has there been research on the impact of microisms?
Actually,
Sorry.
just answered that. We just had
Sorry.
Kai answer that a moment
Oh,
ago.
okay. Oh, okay.
Perfect.
Okay.
So
Okay.
we
Good.
got that. Did we miss anything else? I don't think we did, but would any of the panelists like to add a point before we close? I'd love to hear from you if you have any other point you'd like to stress. Feel free. It was wonderful to hear your insights, though, and your experience, and put that into context for us in the US so we understand a little better about what you're working with, what you're experimenting on, what you're watching, how you're discussing among your peers and those around the world. We really are appreciative of all your efforts, and we will stay tuned on that front. So anything we're missing, but if not, I just appreciate everyone, all of our attendees for joining us, for coming. Thank you so much. And don't forget your surveys. The VIP potential seminar is waiting, and panelists, thank you again for your time. So great to have you all here. I think we'll sign off for now, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.